Heat number 3, individual event number 1 are underway, starting off with a 3,000-meter echo bike. After that, they'll go an 84-foot hand-over-hand sled pull at 225 pounds. Move to a 2,000-meter Assault AirRunner, another 84-foot hand-over-hand pull, 1,000-meter ski, and then a 92-foot hand-over-hand pull. Adrian, we've seen this test for 1 week. We've seen it at different semifinals around the world. After seeing this a few times now, what are you looking at as the make or break portion of this test for these athletes?
Well, I'll tell you, Chase, it could be an accumulation of a few things. If you know that the sled moves well for you, it could come down to how well you manage then the ergs. But for most of these competitors, it is how they manage the sled. And on top of that, then, can you come out controlled and conservative enough to give yourself an opportunity to not just create separation at the sled, but also be able to manage where you finish within this field, even if you're not the leader. So, like you mentioned, we've watched it plenty of times. And what's tried and true is that the ergs can be a trap and the sled can be your surest path to walking away with an event win.
These are your top 20 men coming out of the 2023 quarterfinals. Starting in lane number 1, you have Drake Lewis from Wasatch CrossFit. Lane 2, John Wood from Backcountry CrossFit. Lane 3, Samuel Quant. Lane 4, Matt Poulin from CrossFit Complete. Lane 5, Chandler Smith, CrossFit Invictus. Lane 6, Jack Rosema from CrossFit 785. Lane 7, Brent Fikowski. Lane 8, Mitchell Stevenson from CrossFit I Love It. Lane 9, Cole Griesaber of CrossFit Lee's Summit. Lane 10, your back-to-back 2-time NOBULL CrossFit Games champion, Justin Medeiros out of CrossFit Fort Vancouver. Lane 11, Patrick Vellner of CrossFit Nanaimo. Lane 12, Nick Matthew, CrossFit Minnetonka. Lane 13, Scott Tetlow, Finish Strong CrossFit. Lane 14, Luis Oscar Mora. Lane 15, the comeback kid, the Sager-Tooth Tiger, Cole Sager from CrossFit Spokane Valley, going for his 10th consecutive CrossFit Games. Lane 16, Philip Muscarella out of Precision CrossFit. Lane 7, Tudor Magda, University Place CrossFit. Lane 18, the muscle hamster himself, Colton Mertens, CrossFit Kilo. Lane 19, Roldan Goldbaum out of Strong Suit CrossFit. Lane 20, Brian Humph out of CrossFit Francos.
Stout lineup here for this first test. We're watching a lot of these guys are going to come off this bike with a very casual pace again. For those that might be new to this level of competition, it's a very difficult task to ask that of yourself here with this environment, this lively crowd, and also 100 points on the line. But they're going to come out composed, and then we'll really start to get a really good idea here, Chase, of how this test will play out once they get first touches on the sled.
Just passing the 3:30 mark. Long way to go. Longest test of the weekend for these individuals. Time cap is 30 minutes. The score to beat, set by Raphael Sancton out of 23:19 out of heat number 2. Second best score we've seen was 24:10 out of heat number 1. 10 qualifying spots for the individual men out of the North America West, 10 individual spots for the women. As we have super semis this year for the 2023 NOBULL CrossFit Games season.
John Wood out of Backcountry CrossFit was the first one off, and boy, did he run fast to his rope.
Athletes off onto their first sled pull. Pat Vellner on the right side. Justin Medeiros. These are two athletes that have been going head-to-head for some time now. Justin getting the better end of that matchup over the last couple of years, but Pat Vellner is one of those athletes that just when you think he might be hanging up the old track cleats, comes back with a vengeance and surprises you. Yeah,
Pat's got a lot of fitness, and he's not going anywhere anytime soon, I don't think. You know, discussion that he's had publicly, everything that he says, he's still having fun. He's doing what he does, and he's doing it at a high level. Why would he hang him up?
Athletes on to their second sled pull. 84 feet in total, 3 lengths down, back, and down after finishing that 3K echo bike. They have the longest portion of this test waiting with that 2,000-meter air runner.
We talked about Anthony Davis and his technical proficiency, or the suggestion that we would make to him in regards to keeping those arms long and bending them only after your hips extend. And we're seeing some application of exactly that here in this final heat. Athletes with long arms, dropping their hips, extending their hips, and then finishing pulling that rope right into their torso.
Your top-seeded athletes will be in the middle lanes, 8 through 12. On the left side, you've got lane 1, 2, 3, 4, and 5. And first to the runner, nearly side by side. Lane 2, John Wood. Lane 3, Samuel Quant. And it looks like over in lane 6, Jack Rosema.
Lane 7, the Professor.
Brent Fikowski.
Rosema now onto the runner as well.
Fikowski in lane 7. Chandler Smith in lane number 5. As most athletes now on the air runner, where they will be spending the most time of the 3 move elements that they have. Justin Medeiros in lane number 10. Over in lane 11, Pat Vellner. We've had 2 heats to down. Time to beat, Raphael Sancton, 23:19, set in heat 2. We saw the best time on the women's side to actually come out of heat number 2. Well, there's this stacked field here in heat 3, Adrian. That's going to be tough to keep that one alive with the athletes that we have here.
It is. And I'm most excited to really watch as the back half of this run starts to shape out here, and we start to see where these athletes are pacing and what their body language looks like after they spend about 5 or 6 minutes here. And it's Chase, because of that, the reason is because we've noticed that the first part of this test has very little influence on the back half. And it seems as though it's the athletes that are able to build some momentum throughout the run and then understand they've really got to make haste on the final 2 rounds of the sled pull in order to have a top score.
2,000 meters on this air runner. We've seen a lot of athletes talk about different strategies for this test leading into the second half, which is the double sled pull with the SkiErg in the middle. And most of the athletes, not all, most have talked about, I had a pace, I had a plan, wasn't feeling it, so I backed off the pace knowing full well I needed to save a little bit for that sled pull.
Yeah, people have to strategize this in a very unique way. I mean, to each his own. Again, some runners, as we watch these athletes go through the longest portion of this test, this 2,000-meter run, is that if they feel like they're a strong runner, a lot like we can reference back to when we saw Emily Rolfe in the women's test 1, seize an opportunity, take a chance on something that you would consider a strong suit. Other athletes look at it as, well, the sooner I get off this runner, the sooner I've got to pull. And, well, those pulls really struggle for me, so I can't build too much fatigue here, or they're going to be even harder. This run, to me, is a great example of, in this test, the rich can get richer. If you were moving the sled well, and you know you're going to spend a lot of time on the run, well, this is where you lean in and you create separation, or you close the gap on others that might have created one in the early parts of this test.
But and as you said, that there does need to be a balance of fitness across those athletes as well. Bigger and taller doesn't necessarily mean better if you don't have the endurance to back it up.
That's right.
This is heat 3 of 3. These individual men taking the floor for the first time this weekend. We've already had 1 day of competition where the teams completed tests 1 and 2. They actually kicked off this morning with test 3, so they are halfway through. Just as the individual men take the floor for the first time, we're approaching the 10-minute mark.
And I will say, just even watching Pat Vellner, that you guys can see in the far right of your screen, has increased his pacing quite a bit throughout, as you see him right here, dead center in lane 11. He started with a very natural, smooth cadence, and now he's leaning forward a little bit more. Stride distance has picked up just a touch.
And a difference of this air runner, say, running on flat ground, that curve at the front, if you have the right technique, you can use that to your advantage without overexerting yourself.
Yeah, it's very true, Chase. You can use the leverage that your body weight and the power from your legs creates. There's a bit of a compromise there when you do that. For these athletes that are posterior dominant and have the hamstrings and glutes to sustain that, they can almost heel toe it, as Brian referred to earlier, as almost like a heel strike. But if you're afraid your posterior blow up from that, because it will build a lot of fatigue there, then it can put you in a really bad spot. It can also spike your heart rate. So it's certainly a skill running on this Assault runner that needs to be developed over time and through reps. And it can be very different stimulus than running on flat ground.
One of the athletes we haven't really talked about too much is Samuel Quant over in lane number 3. Brian's over there watching that end of the competition. Brian, what do you have?
Yeah, actually, as soon as I got off with you guys in Heat 2, I kind of forgot that he was in this heat. And I hate to say that. I mean, you've talked about it before, that a lot of times he flies under the radar. But if you think back to the Capital event from the Games last year, that was the moment where he really made his mark on the competition. And it was with that heavy sandbag carry up the Capital stairs. With that heavy amount of grunt work at the end of this workout, and he's already out in the front of the pack. You know he can long run. We know he loves that kind of implement. I think he's going to have a strong finish and come out with a bang here to start the weekend in California.
A very good point about flying under the radar. I think Samuel Quant, with his success early on in his career, had some on-off years, have some top finishes across he's just one of those athletes that is really oddly flown under the radar.
Yeah, he really has. It's very true. Sorry, Brian. I was just adding to that. It's like, you said, Chase, he doesn't get a lot of love. And I was like, well, you wonder why. But I appreciate this about Sam Quant, is that he stepped on the scene. He had success early. And what he hasn't been is some Instagram prima donna or someone that's like, hey, look at me, look at me. He handles his work and he goes about it in a very quiet manner. And yet he's still one of the most tried and true competitors within our sport. And we do find ourselves talking a lot about him. And usually towards the end of a competition where we're like, oh, by the way, here he is again in the top 5.
Yeah, I'm very much lesser known athlete right next to him in John Wood. He was in the Wodapalooza field this year and did quite well. He moved the sled just about as good as Sam did. And if they're able to get off this run at the same time and have that little push against each other, it might be difficult for anyone else to catch him.
Brian, who in this field would surprise us that might struggle here in these 20 athletes?
Like I mentioned, if Vellner wants to win this weekend, I think he's gonna need to steal some points from Justin. This is a pretty big men's field, like you were talking about, Adrian, in the last heat. I think some of those times from early heats can play, and if Justin doesn't lock up a top 10 finish on this one, I'll be curious to see how he responds being in a little bit of a deficit, because it does look like Pat is moving very well.
Thank you, Brian. We'll check back in later in the test, as these athletes are still working on the back half of the 2,000 meters on the air runner. These lanes 11 through 20. We heard Colton Mertens was struggling a little bit in lane 18 with the sled.
Got a hand up for Vellner, Chase.
Oh. Hand up for Pat Vellner. If you think of a man who is a man who's good at upper body pulling with endurance, stamina, and strength, you talk Pat Vellner.
You do. And then when you talk Pat Vellner, it's natural to talk Brent Fikowski, and his judge also has a hand up.
Vellner off the runner first, and we work to the back half of this test. 84-foot sled pull, 225 pounds on the sled, 1,000-meter ski, finishing off with one more sled pull. And Pat Vellner off the runner first, and here comes Brent Fikowski. We talked about earlier that Brian had mentioned Fikowski may be using a technique, and if you look at Fikowski actually fared the best of anyone in this field. If you go all the way back to 2016.
Oh, yeah.
In the heavy rope chipper, ending with that sled pull. The way he pulled that sled got him one of those event wins in his rookie year.
And Brent took the lead there on that first initial pull off the runner.
So Brent Fikowski, Pat Vellner. Your top two. Muscarella is off over in lane 16. Brent Fikowski in the pink shorts. Those center lanes. Pat Vellner in the black shorts, red socks, trying to hold off his countrymen.
And one thing that Brent's doing extremely well is creating that long body and long arm position that we mentioned. Even in the last heat, we were watching Anthony Davis almost do the opposite. But Brent is being patient with the way he gets it moving. There's no jarring or jerking of the sled. He gets the rope extremely tight, and then he reaches literally as far as he can before creating any momentum back towards his body. This is going to reduce a lot of unwanted or unneeded movement of the sled and help him save energy.
You know, one thing Brent Fikowski does very well, he's nicknamed the professor for a reason, and it's his meticulous approach to not just strategy itself in the test, but how he executes particular movements. We've seen him use odd techniques or that we considered odd and unique that actually work well in his favor. And one thing with this sled, Adrian, as you mentioned, is it's not just the technique that you have, but not having any wasted effort or energy because of how taxing this sled pull can be.
Yeah, and it's interesting as I watch Vellner make his efforts to move his sled, he's starting to take some longer breaks in between his pulls. And one of the substantial differences between him and Brent, again, is how much Brent was reaching forward instead of just sitting back initially. He reaches forward as much as he could, then would lean back. And I'm actually starting to see Medeiros implement a similar strategy that Fikowski was doing before he got on the ski. As literally Brent Fikowski's looking behind him, Chase. He's looking behind him to see who else is on the SkiErg with me as he watches Sam Quant join him.
The answer is no one until Sam Quant got there, Brent. But yes, looking over his shoulder, always aware of the surroundings. Adrian, you talk to different athletes in different camps, and they have different approaches about that competitor awareness on the competition floor. And you see some athletes say, I just stay in my lane. They say of other athletes that is like, I'm fully aware of what's going on at all times. What type of athlete are you?
Oh man, that's a great question. And for me, it really depends on the test. And I got to be honest about it's dependent upon my own capacity. When I know I have an opportunity to lead a test, I do have the freedom to look left and right and decide how I need to play that particular game within that test. But if I know this is going to be a test for me that I have got several limiters, I've really got to make sure I don't go to muscle failure, or I've really got to make sure I don't come out too hot, then is when I become a little bit more self-concerned and I keep that battle a little bit more internal. So I think historically, Chase, throughout our sport, we've watched athletes at the top and we hear their conversation about playing the field, and it's because their general physical preparedness is at such a different level than the rest of the field that they have an opportunity to play with gears and not just be running full speed all the time.
You know, one thing about Brent Fikowski and his just history of competition and the success at the regional, semifinal, and games level usually centers around long tests and chippers. And if you look at test number 1, I know we get hyper-focused on what test 6 is as a skills chipper, but this in and of itself is a monostructural chipper with some sled pull. So, you know, Brent went on social media a couple days ago as like, test 6 may not be my chipper victory that I may get, but we're looking at what could possibly be another event chipper win for Brent Fikowski if he can hold on to this pace.
I think you're correct 100%. And I really believe that this is still that format that makes Brent Fikowski so very dangerous. When we would watch him come onto the scene so strongly back in 2016 and punch a ticket to the CrossFit Games, it was with events or tests just like this, where he would just beat the field by minutes at that time regionals. And we were like, oh my goodness, this dude moves like a machine. He's a robot.
Full field onto the 1,000-meter ski before they get to their third and final sled pull. We're slowly approaching the 20-minute mark. The time to beat set in heat number 3 by Raphael Sancton at 23:19. Your leader so far in this heat was Brent Fikowski, but we got to say it before it happens. Don't count out what Quant can do on the SkiErg.
Yeah, and I'm watching him right now chasing lane 3, and he is pulling with urgency. It's not that he's just moving through it. He's not trying to recover there. He's pulling with force. He's dropping his hips into that hinge position, a lot like Brent Fikowski, as we watch his judge raise his hand in the final stretch of these 100 meters.
Brent Fikowski, judge, hand in the air, designating 100 meters left on the ski. We are 3 minutes out of the unofficial time to beat. Before we get there, Brian's got something on your back-to-back champ, Justin Medeiros.
Fikowski making his way. He's already at the sled now. Same technique that we've seen time and time again in this test already. Long arms, really reaching forward, then settling back.
Fikowski working on his first pull. Justin Medeiros still on the ski.
He's joined by Quant Chase, but Quant had to take a moment to actually fix his sled. The rope was caught under his sled, so before he could begin his run back, he had to adjust that, and that could cost him some precious time.
2 minutes before we reach the time set by Raphael in heat number 2, 23:19. Brent Fikowski, your current leader in this heat.
Got Pat Vellner, Cole Graysaber, and Mitchell Stevenson on the run, joined by Justin Medeiros here for their final sled pulls as well.
Justin Medeiros, your back-to-back CrossFit Games champ for the individual men on his first sled pull. And it looks like we got a big fight for third place. Right now it's Brent Fikowski followed by Sam Kwan and about 4 or 5 other athletes. As Fikowski's finishing up his second length onto his third and final length, and he has 1 minute and 19 seconds to get the best score we've seen so far. Brent Fikowski in lane number 7. This last length will be the longest length of the 3. And of the 3 total lengths they have to do,
Medeiros still about 3 feet ahead of where Vellner is with his sled, both on the second length of their final 92 feet of the pool.
Brent Fikowski leading the way. 20 seconds. Fikowski, 2 pulls. And Brent Fikowski, with 1 more pull across the finish line, will take test number 1. And the chipper master strikes again.
What execution by Brent there.
Time to beat coming in, 23:19. We now eclipse that. Now the question is where Sam Quant is going to be. Sam Quant struggling with the rope, having to stop and chalk up, and he's going to have to look over his shoulder because there are about 4 or 5 other athletes nipping at his heels.
Medeiros is close right here. Graysaber just finished ahead of him in lane 9.
Justin Medeiros looks like he's 1 pull away to cross the finish line. Pat Vellner has fallen off the pace dramatically. He was about in a 4-way tie for that 3rd place position as he's just getting started on his 3rd and final pull.
And Mitchell Stevenson also across.
Brent Fikowski with an unofficial win to start the weekend. We still have well over 5 minutes left in this, but Pat Vellner.
Pat Vellner falling off that pace and also joined by Nick Matthew, who is right there, as well as Cole Sager trying to close the gap on these 2.
Now, one thing we've seen from Pat over the years is that he can tip the scales into that failure fatigue a little bit.
And Nick Matthew comes across the finish line.
These athletes
Vellner right after.
Vellner has crossed the finish line. As these athletes are working through this, let's go down to Brian Friend.
Yeah, Chase, I was just watching Justin on the ski, and it reminded me of two things from last season. One was on ski school, or rinse and repeat, excuse me, where he may not be the best swimmer in the field, but he absolutely rips on the SkiErg. And secondarily, I did a big study on him after he won his second CrossFit Games championship, and he is the best pacer I've ever seen in CrossFit since maybe Rich Froning. And the back third of this workout, you saw exactly that. Pat made the push on the run, but Justin's push on the ski and the sled pulls paid off for him once again.
It's looking like we're going to have a big battle with these athletes all weekend long. As test 1 is done for most of the athletes here in heat number 3, Brent Fikowski taking the unofficial win for test number 1. As we have 4 minutes remaining in this 30-minute cap. And for Brent Fikowski, that's his 4th career semifinal test win.
And in true professor fashion, did it with the cleanest sled pulls that I've seen so far in the 2 weeks that we've been watching this test take place.
Colton Mertens in lane 18 is working through his sled pulls. Either side of him, you have Tudor Magda, Roldan Goldbaum. Just over 3 minutes remaining before we hit this 30-minute cap.
Drake Lewis also still an athlete out there on the floor. Just finished his first length of the last 92 feet.
You have 3 minutes remaining. Goal and Madison and out player remains 18-19.
225 pounds on the sled.
You can see a lot, even as we see Tudor Magda there making some pulls shirtless there in the center of your screen. Body language tells a lot, and a lot of these guys still out here on the floor have met the ends of their means, meaning that, they felt a little fatigued probably 8 to 10 minutes ago and had almost hit a wall and are just continually grinding through that, trying to, of course, minimize the time spent on the floor there. But this is when you're at a point where it gets really dark in your mind due to the fact of how much suffering is actually taking place, and all you want to do is move that sled. But unfortunately, at this point, it's probably moving a lot lesser distance with each pull than it was early in this test.
And I think we got to remember is that what this is doing to these athletes, compounding what we'll see later this afternoon for these athletes with that ring complex and ruck. So if your grip, biceps, forearms are blown out from this test, it's managing that workload, not just one individual test, but for the weekend in total.
Yeah, it's interesting, Chase. I just saw a side conversation between Brent Fikowski and Pat Vellner over there. They were both messing with Pat's sled. I don't know if it's one of those conversations where Pat was like, hey, yeah, you should have felt my sled. Your sled looked light. Why don't you come see if mine was as light as yours? As there's a little bit of a briefing taking place between a few of these athletes.
It's right at a minute left here. All athletes left on the field, working their way through these last sled pulls. 92 total feet, 225 pounds on the sled.
Come on. Drake Lewis only about 25 feet away from finishing. Every rep counts for these athletes. Every time it passes one of those hash marks, they're going to be rewarded a rep.
$20 seconds remaining. as test 1 slowly makes its way to a close. But it is Brent Fikowski with an unofficial test win. And Mr. Brent Fikowski, can you hear us, sir?
I can hear you loud and clear. Can you hear me?
I can hear you. You
Yes.
look fantastic. You sound fantastic. I know coming in, you had talked about the chipper that is test 6 might not be the chipper you win, but here we are in test number 1, and you still got it, buddy.
Thanks, man. Yeah, after all these years, baby, still got it.
Still got it. Brent, you are so meticulous in the way you approach events themselves, whether it's the movements, the way you strategize, but we talked about the sled itself being so particular about how you navigate that. How much work did you do in kind of finding what best fits you with the sled pull?
Yeah, I mean, I think in training, I tried 3 different sleds loaded from light to, I think I loaded up a sled to 380 pounds before I left just to see, well, if it really isn't moving, how can I get it moving? So it felt like I was prepared as possible. And then I'm confident in the sled, but I didn't want to be overconfident. So I made sure every pull counted. I didn't rush when I was spinning the sled, because you could see how in some lanes that the fabric would get wrapped under the plate if you're rushing those transitions a little too much. So just trying to be methodical and have no mistakes and not get caught up in too many races. And fortunate with a bit of luck and a lot of training, it paid off.
Brent, how much did you look at week 1 as a way to help prep you for week 2?
Yeah, quite a bit. Every event a little differently. Like I didn't really look much at people's snatches, or even Linda, I didn't look as much. But this event for sure, I watched it in its entirety once, and then again taking splits, and then again just trying to see who was pulling the sled well and who seemed to have trouble near the end, and just tried to mimic those techniques as best I could.
Well, Brent, congratulations on your unofficial test win to start the weekend off. You got about 15, 20 seconds here in the world watching. Feel free to shout out to wherever you want out there.
Just thanks everyone for watching. Thanks for tuning in. Start of a long weekend. I'm going to go back and fuel up and rest up. I know no one remembers at the end of the weekend who won the first workout. So thank you. All right. We'll see you guys later.